Hi everybody, I'm going to try to get through this fairly quickly, so I might not answer fully everything, but I'll give you what I can for the last anticipation guide for anticipation guide 8, which is for chapter 5C, the last part, formal assessment, formal language assessment. It was informal, which is more or less a formative assessment. Now it's summative assessment, but even more than summative assessment. Sometimes we're talking here about standardized tests. These aren't the tests that the teachers are making. This is not specific to your what you've taught to the students, but these are usually assessments that come in from the outside that you don't have so much control over because the principal has bought it, the school district has bought it. They might not be familiar with these. You are the expert. You are the one trained in ESL and linguistics and in the assessment and in culture and so forth. And it's possible that your principal or even people in the district might not have had as much training as you have. Again, I need to emphasize that you are not bilingual education. You are ESL, which means you're probably going to do if you were anywhere else other than Laredo, you will be having mostly students who are not from Mexico or from a Latin American country. You will have those of other languages. Those who need bilingual education will be in a bilingual classroom, but those who are from other languages, chances are you will have them. Okay, so we're not talking about the bilingual assessments because you're the ESL. And so don't think that way. They're mentioned in this book because this book is used for bilingual education as well as for ESL. And make sure we separate the ESL part of it from the bilingual part. That's why the book mentions assessments in the native language, but you're not going to have an opportunity to do that so much because you are ESL. Okay, our language from Francisco, our language proficiency assessment, always effective. It depends on who is doing it, who's evaluating it, and the conditions it's given under. It can be effective if it's done correctly and if you're trained in how to interpret properly. What's another way that you can ensure appropriate formal assessments? What the book recommends is that you read them ahead of time. You try to get copies ahead of time. You try to be part of the selection process of which tests will be appropriate, those that are less biased. Some of you wrote the word bias all the time without the ED, and it needs the ED. And so I took off grammar for those of you who didn't spell that correctly. But make sure it's free of bias, that the pictures are appropriate, that they're more universal, that the language is appropriate for, or the reading level, or the question asked is appropriate for the grade level or the age of the child. And their language proficiency really has very little to do with if these are effective or not, because it is testing efficiency, proficiency. Okay, Marissa, what other ways teachers use the results of formal language assessment? Well, for placement, for exit, for improving your instruction, all of these things, knowing your student so that you can gauge how to give them formative assessment, how you can scaffold them so you can help get the parents involved or siblings involved who are older and perhaps have higher skills than the child. And how can accountability ensure that students succeed in school? Well, if the principal is checking to make sure that your students are improving, that's important, or someone else in the district or even parents, they're going to want to see some improvement in their child. That's accountability. Crystal, do schools get in trouble if they leave students in a program that they are eligible to be exited from? Yes, of course they do. If it find out. Now, sometimes the parents resist that because they might be getting some kind of financial benefit or subsidy because of their child being classified that way. And so they know how many years they should be in this program, and it's up to you for the child to make progress, so they will be exited at a certain time. And in some cases, they will be exited if they're ready or not, so you have to do your best. Okay, for students in kindergarten, is it too early to determine if to place them in language programs at this age? No, they speak no English, of course. They need to be in some kind of a program. Um, but you're going to be working with kids that are probably a little bit older. You wouldn't have ESL so much in kindergarten. It's possible, but it would be much different. We're thinking here middle school because that's in Laredo anyway. That's when you do it mostly. And most school districts are going to want you for the middle grades, probably fourth grade to eighth grade or so, or through fourth through sixth, most likely. Okay, Emily, what are examples of inappropriate content and formal assessment? Inappropriate content is again vocabulary that is very specialized, not general enough, and then also you don't want to give a second grade assessment to a sixth grader because the topics will be just way too low. Why results of language is not always interpreted cautiously because they just going through the motions and they're not looking at the child and the child's needs and the parents. You are going to know the child, you're going to know the parents, you're going to know the assessments. You will be able to talk with the parents and give them a realistic idea of how well their child is really doing. Miriam, can a teacher request another formal language assessment if they think that they are biased? Remember the ED to their students. Okay. So let's see here. I don't know. You can request one. They probably won't give it to you. You can do your informal assessments, but remember, these are standardized tests that you probably don't have very much control over unless you are the district person. And then if you are the district person who chooses the test, then you have a lot of control. How many formative language assessments can be given to a student? Now, formative, I think, was in an earlier part of the chapter. We're talking about the formal language assessments here, which is more standardized. Okay, Amy, what are the effects of giving inappropriate formal assessments? Incorrect placement, frustration, and it'll make it more difficult for you to talk to the parents if it was inappropriate and the results aren't realistic. What are the consequences of placing a student in the wrong program? The child will either get bored because it's too easy, or they'll get frustrated because it's too hard. And that's important. Elizabeth, why aren't students monitored after exiting the program? There's no money. There's nobody who has the time to do it. It would be nice if they were monitored, but once they're exited, there's no reason to monitor them anymore, but they're going to be in the general student population, and they will have to meet the standards of whatever level they're at, whatever class they're in, the teacher they're in. And so there's sort of an informal monitoring going on. I'm doing a monitoring here as I look at your grammar, as I look at how you answer the questions and so forth, and you're adjusting to me. And so there is monitoring, there is feedback, but the feedback will be more to the child than to the parents, unless your parents are looking at your grades. Is there any way that teachers can change the way formal assessments are assessed for the CLB students? Not likely, because they're going to be given to you. You're not making them. But you can have some input as to give your good reasons for why it's inappropriate or why you prefer one over another. Anna, can teachers petition for the inclusion of a language program that they believe will better benefit than one currently in place at the school? Yes, you can petition. You should do it in a way that doesn't embarrass the school district, that doesn't get you into trouble, but you can push for something like that. Get your evidence together, get supporters, and always do it in a diplomatic way. Can teachers assess students for identification as different needs are noticed, or only at the beginning of the school year? Yeah, you can keep assessing them. There are probably some assessments, but those will probably be informal assessments. But you might be able to work with your administration to look at a particular child and make some other decision if what's happening there isn't appropriate. If the placement is incorrect, you should do something to try to fix it. Why would they keep a student who is already proficient in English at least 2 years in a program? Um, I'm not sure why would they. Maybe for the benefits that might be there. Maybe the other teachers just don't want to deal with it. Maybe you're the ESL teacher is a better teacher than the other teacher where they would go. There's different reasons. Your students can make connections to content in English with CUP. Why is Spanish prohibited form from instruction, or a prohibited form of instruction, or I'm not sure what you mean there. Can make connections and contents in English with CUP. And you shouldn't be using Spanish in an ESL classroom. It's not a bilingual classroom. You should be using ESL methods. Now, working one-on-one with the child, perhaps, but you're not going to be repeating while you're lecturing. First reading it in Spanish, doing it in Spanish, and then in English, like I've heard done at Martin High School from several of the teachers. They seem to say everything once in English and once in Spanish, and none of the kids are ESL or bilingual or anything. It's possible it's not best practices because they need a good English model. Remember, this book is for bilingual education and also for ESL. You need to take the bilingual out of it and think of it from the ESL context, because a lot of the samples they had of assessments, most of them were for bilingual education, especially with the CUP was underlying proficiencies. A lot of those were for bilingual education, but you had to focus in on that one or two that are specifically for English. And as one of you wrote, it's very expensive to do these in all the different languages, in Vietnamese, in Arabic, Turkish, Chinese, Korean. It's very expensive and very hard to do these language assessments in those languages. So you're going to have to play it by ear in that sense. So it's unlikely you're going to be able to do that as in the ESL classroom because you don't speak those languages for those students who are not Spanish speakers, unless you've studied abroad and learned one of those other languages I mentioned, but none of you have told me that you have yet. And on IASA, what is or what are other examples of inappropriate content in formal assessments? I think I talked about that. Topics that are just too specific, a reading level that is unrealistic for the age level of the child or the grade level of the child. You don't want to give a second grade reading level test to a sixth grade student, even if they don't speak that good of English. And how do you know how much language and academic they need to know to get exited out from the programs? Well, it all depends on the assessments. They'll give them another assessment later on, and sometimes time has run out, and when time runs out, you have to exit them. There are laws about that. There are rules, there are policies that you must exit them. So you have to do your best job to get them ready for when they do exit. They can exit early if they show proficiency on one of these tests that they're talking about. Hope this helps, and I'll try to get the next one back to you guys a little bit quicker.